37 through 9. Two things I ask of you, O Lord. Do not refuse me before I die. Keep falsehood and lies far from me. Give me neither poverty nor riches, but give me only my daily bread. Otherwise, I may have too much and disown you, and say, who is the Lord? Or I may become poor and steal, and so dishonor the name of my God. Real quick, I'm just going to start off with describing what the land of milk and honey is. It's actually two different lands, but we'll start with honey. The land of honey is where the farmers lived. They lived in the plains, the coastal areas, and the mountains. That was called the land of honey. The reason they call it the land of honey is because the honeybees can make honey from that area. The land of milk is in the desert. That's where the shepherds are. And the reason they call it the land of milk is because the goats produce milk from that area. So there's two facts. Just remember those: land of milk, honey, mountains, desert, or desert, mountain. Oh. The Hebrew word for desert is midbar. There's also another definition for midbar. You have the place of speaking or the place of hearing. So where would you go to hear God? Now y'all can answer.
Desert.
Exactly, the desert.
Yes.
Because in the desert, you can't survive without God. There's no other way. If He does not send you water, if He does not send you food, if He does not send you shade, if He does not send you rescue, you will die in the desert. But in the honeyland, when you go back to the honeyland after you come out of the desert, you got to be careful because you're doing it all for yourself. You have all this food just close by. You have water, that easy access. You have shade, houses that are already built for you. And you don't need rescue because you're doing just fine. And you got to be very careful when you go back because you'll start saying, my hands and my strength have done this for me. And you'll start to forget all about God and who brought you through the desert. Because in the desert, you can only survive with God. What's the most dangerous thing in the desert?
Sandstorm.
What?
No.
No.
Cold breathing.
No.
Snakes.
Wild
Lack of water.
Wild
No,
animals.
no. No.
Isn't it? Not having God.
It's actually floods.
Not having God.
In the desert, the most dangerous thing is floods by far in this desert. Because even though in the desert it hasn't rained, in parts of the desert it hasn't rained since Jesus was alive. But 40 miles away in these mountains, it pours down. 40 inches a year. All this rain comes in about 12 weeks. And these mountains can't handle all this water, so some of it runs into the Mediterranean, some of it goes into the Dead Sea, but most of it goes into the desert. And what you get is these huge canyons that are called wadis. And a wadi is a dry river bed that only floods when it rains. And these wadis are the most dangerous thing in the desert because you'll go down to get a drink and then water will come through and kill you. And it hasn't rained in the desert in 1,000 years. A couple years ago, 2 students were in the desert and they ran out of water and it was really hot. And they stumbled upon one of these wadis and they saw some leftover water in there. So they went down there, started getting something to drink. And on a cloudless day, hasn't rained in the desert for 1,000 years, 70 feet of water came pouring through there. One of them they found, the other they never found. They were both dead. And you'll often find goats or sheep in the bottom of these wadis because they'll be so thirsty they'll want to get a drink. And then the flood will come through and kill them. The natives there, they have these barrels, like half of a barrel, and they stand there with an iron bar and they bang on it. And that tells the shepherds, tells these girls to get out of the wadi because it's raining somewhere and the flood's coming. But in these canyons, you get these parts called slot canyons that collect an enormous amount of water. That if you're in them and the flood comes, you can't get out. You can't get out. And you're going to die. But the risk is, after the floods come through, there's these pools of water in the bottom. And you'll be so hot and so thirsty that you'll go down there. And if it's the flood season, you could die. And after the water comes through, it leaves behind the stickiest and the muddiest clay you've ever seen. Like, there's parts that get knee deep, and if you take one step in it, you're ankle deep. Take 5 more steps, you have so much mud on your feet that you can't take any more steps. You're stuck. And Psalm 40, David, he says, I waited patiently for the Lord. He turned to me and heard my cry. He lifted me out of the slimy pit, out of the mud and mire, and he set my feet on a rock. He gave me a firm place to stand. David said, he's saying, God, I'm stuck in the miry clay. Lift my feet out of this clay and put it on solid ground. I can see David picture himself in one of these canyons. He's stuck in this clay and he can't move. He can see the flood coming and he can't do anything about it. Have you been there? Have you been in a situation due to your sin, someone else's sin, or just a circumstance that you're stuck? You can see the disaster coming and you can't do anything about it. That's the psalm. There's 2 types of water in the desert. You have still water and not still water.
What's the only type in the world?
But these 2 types, neither of them move. They're both still water, but one's called still water and one's not still. Still water is a water that got there other than by a flood. So that means it's probably from like a spring or rain, I guess. Or it doesn't rain. But not still water is from like a flood. And Psalm 23. Y'all know this. The Lord is my shepherd, all of that. But it says, he leads me by quiet waters, or he leads me by still waters. Still in this passage, or quiet, comes from the word shalom, meaning peace. That it means that that water is safe to drink from. But this water in the canyon, in this wadi, is not safe. And God, both waters will look the same. They might taste exactly the same. They might seem the same. But if you were to pick the wrong one, you could die. Now, if I'm a sheep, who knows the difference? I don't. The shepherd does. That's why you follow the shepherd. That's why the Lord leads you by still waters. But in this passage, he's saying, the Lord leads me by still waters. It means God is saying, Brady, don't drink this water, but drink this water. Alyssa, don't drink this water, but drink this water. That's what God's telling you. You have to take God at his word. You have to trust God.